and the re-establishment of the Jewish nation. As a result, the Zionist movement, the modern movement for the creation of a homeland for the Jewish people, was established as a political movement in 1897. The World Zionist Organization and the Jewish National Fund encouraged immigration and funded purchase of land, both under Ottoman rule and under British rule, in the region of Palestine, while Arab nationalism, at least in an early form, and Syrian nationalism were the dominant tendencies, along with continued loyalty to the Ottoman state in the area. Zionist ambitions were increasingly identified as a threat by the Arab leaders in Palestine region. The Arab population in the Palestine region began protesting against the acquisition of lands by the Jewish population. As a result, in 1892 the Ottoman authorities banned land sales to foreigners. By 1914 the Jewish population in Palestine had risen to over 60,000, with around 33,000 of these being recent settlers. After World War I, in 1915, the McMahon-Hussein Correspondence was formed as an agreement with Arab leaders to grant sovereignty to Arab lands, control to form an Arab state, in exchange for the Great Arab Revolt against the Ottomans. However, the Balfour Declaration in 1917 proposed to favor the establishment, in Palestine, of a national home for the Jewish people, but that nothing should be done to prejudice the civil and religious rights of the existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. Which in general means that British played a clever hand here. They promised both Arabs and Jews to help them in defeating Ottoman Empire and in return to give Palestine region to establish their own country, but British also made a secret deal with French, and as Ottoman Empire declined, British and French divided Middle East area between themselves. The British took over the control of the Palestine region and ruled over for 3 decades. At the same time Hitler rose into power and Jews were massacred in millions in genocide, where Jews were forced to move from Hitler-controlled Europe to different regions to save themselves, and majority goes into Palestine. Around 1940s Palestinian nationalist movement has also begun, and they demanded their own country. In 1948 British government gets out of Palestine region and added the responsibility to United Nations. Then United Nations comes with a partition plan for Jewish and Palestinian country, where 55% of region is under the control of Jewish state and 45% is in control of Arab states, and the rest 5% is part of Jerusalem, which was under international control. Jews accepted named their country Israel in 1948, but rest of Arab nations would not be pleased with this plan and start a war with their words of that they will not allow Jews to take any part of land. This war is called the First Arab-Israeli War of 1948. In this war more than 5 countries were fighting against a tiny new country, Israel. Jews had seen how the world had kept treating them, and they knew if they didn't fight to survive then they wouldn't be able to survive ever, and they fought the war, and very surprisingly Israel won the war. After the war ends in 1949, the areas that were supposed to be Palestine's according to the United Nations partition plan, Israel occupied several of these areas, and Palestinians became homeless, and more than 700,000 Palestinians had to leave their homes and became refugees in other Arab countries. This event is called 1948 Palestinian Exodus. In 1964, Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, was founded aiming Palestinians' own nation, but they initially choose armed struggle and also wanted that Israeli should no more exist, so America and Israel declare it to be terrorist organization, but there are always 2 perspectives of any events, as of this in one's perspective, they are terrorist organization, and one the other they are revolutionary, who want freedom for their country. After this in 1967, the Second Arab-Israeli War takes place for 6 days, and Israel wins this too, and a large part of Egyptian peninsula gets occupied by Israeli forces after the war. In 1973, the Third Arab-Israeli War begins where much of the things doesn't change. But in 1974, Palestine Liberation Organization gets officially recognized by United Nations General Assembly to be the representative of Palestinian people. In 1979, The peace talks between Egypt and Israel is successful, and Egypt becomes the first Arab country to recognize Israel as a country that exists there. An entire Egyptian peninsula area captured is returned back, and both the prime ministers are awarded with Nobel Peace Prize for the successful peace treaty. But after 2 years, the Egyptian PM gets assassinated by the right-wing extremists in Egypt for the treaty with Israel. During this period, many Israelis start establishing their colonies at West Bank, supported by Israeli government, which is opposed by international community deems these settlements to be illegal as they were against UN partition plan. In 1987, a new group formation takes place called the Hamas Group. In 1992, Israel gets a new prime minister, Yitzhak Rabin, and try to get peace, cool down the tension between Israel and Palestine, and Oslo Accords were held in 1993 and talk about ways on correctly and peacefully divide the region. As a result, in 1994 the Palestinian government is established for the first time, and it is named Palestinian National Authority and decide to make the region of West Bank into 3 regions. In reality, Palestine gets only some bits and pieces in the West Bank and Gaza Strip to form their country, but as hopes of peace gets on, with time extreme right-wing Jewish people assassinate their PM, and situation gets worse after that. At the same time, Hamas claims that the PLO is being too secular and compromising a lot with Israel, and thus Hamas group wanted to eradicate Israel, and hatred kept increasing. In 2002, violent protests were seen on both sides, and more than 100 Israelis and Palestinians died on the either sides of the border, and Israelis start building walls around its settlements and imposed security checkposts. In 2006, Hamas group wins Palestinian election against PLO, which resulted in civil war between two parties' supporters in 2007. In 2007, this war is named Battle of Gaza, and Palestine divides into 2. Hamas established control over Gaza Strip, and West Bank is controlled by PLO. Recently, the rockets and war we got to witness are from Gaza Strip area to Israel, whereas in West Bank, where PLO has control, this sort of violence is not seen. At the conclusion, either of the sides are right on their own terms, as they have their own perspectives, so we pray that they also do acknowledge it and make it a more peaceful conflicts as possible. At last, we can only say that every life on planet is important and has its own value and own right to live, so respecting that we must stay respectfully to each one of them and stop or avoid harming them. Let us all come together to support the more peaceful way of resolving these matters. If you liked our content, please do subscribe and like this video. We bring more such video to you in upcoming days. Thank you for watching. Subscribe and like this video. Thank you for watching. If you didn't watch part 1, watch that also.